Cheryl.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. This is the City of Rehoboth Beach Animal Issues Committee. It is Tuesday, April 30th, about 4 minutes after 2 p.m., and our committee meeting is called to order. We will do a quick roll call, and let me just, for the record, indicate that all members are here with the exception of Ray Bryant. So present is Cheryl Crowe, Bob Harrison, Marcia Maldeis, Maldeis.
I didn't marry.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcia, and Libby Stiff, and myself, Dick Byrne, as chair. Welcome, everyone. Good to have you here. Thank you for making the time. And we have a busy agenda today. We have not met since September 17th of last calendar year. And so the first order of business is to take a look at, it was November 20th of 2018 we last met. I'm looking at the wrong agenda. So hopefully you've looked at the minutes from our November meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion approved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? You need a minute to look back at the minutes? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes, thank you. And Marcia, thank you for taking the minutes and continuing as our loyal and steady secretary. We're going to take a look at correspondence. There's 3 items of correspondence, 2 which relate to an item later on the agenda and 1 that does not. The first one that does not was that I received a letter on January 28th from the Delaware Council of Wildlife, and they simply were saying that they had seen a recent article in the News Journal about our committee, and they thought that it may be helpful for our committee to know that the Delaware Council of Wildlife actually exists and that they do a lot of work across the state with wildlife. This is the brochure. I will pass it on. And Kathy Martin, the secretary to that group, indicated they'd be more than happy to hear from us at any time that they could be helpful or be a resource. The other 2 letters of correspondence relate to something we'll talk about later on the agenda, and that has to do with pet waste dispensers. So let me hold these items of correspondence until that point, because then they will be relevant. And so I want to, as we get started, and because it's been a while since we've met, just quickly, and not to be redundant, but quickly to just review what our mission is and what we agreed, oh gosh, probably 2 years ago as we reviewed the mission and tinkered with the words a bit. And so just to go on record again to say that the mission of the Animal Issues Committee is to provide ideas, suggestions, and solutions in order to create a more animal-friendly environment in the city of Rehoboth Beach, while working to preserve the health, peace, safety, cleanliness, and good order of the city and its inhabitants. The committee will work to inspire the community to sustain wildlife populations and habitats through science-based management and conservation. And to be reminded that we are advisory to the Board of Commissioners. And then there's a little more bureaucratic language that I don't need to go over right now, but just, I think it's always good to review who we are, why we exist, what we're trying to accomplish. Comments, questions on that? Okay, I think the real meat and potatoes of our meeting is to talk about where we're at with the website, and then to go into a review of where we're at with our review of the city code, and then we'll take a few minutes to touch on a couple of other things. So Cheryl and I met again, it was in December, I believe, with Chris Johnson, Director of Communications, who is responsible for the information that goes on the city website, and she works with the IT department to do that. So Cheryl, do you want to give an update on where we're at?
Sure.
Please.
Yeah, we had looked at the City of Rehoboth website and tried to find the most sensible way to make some additions regarding resources for information regarding animals and pets within the city. You know, it was one of those things where we certainly didn't want to overwhelm any particular section, so there was some conversation back and forth about where on the city tabs we should include that. I think originally we had thought of you know, coming up with this beautiful graphic and novel linked section, and that's not really a reality. So we're just going to include the information to merge with the current look and layout of the city website. So it would be just links. We're not going to do any special graphics or anything like that, which is fine. The information that we thought should be included were were in various forms. What I sent to Chris was a section for lost pets. That's excuse me, not extremely, I would say extremely common within the city, but sure, it happens. And you know, we all know the resources, but the general public and also visitors may or may not. So it was certainly a helpful inclusion to include information for the Office of Animal Welfare, the Brandywine Valley SPCA, and also subsequent links for lost pet specific pages, nextdoor.com, and the City of Rehoboth Beach Police Department, which we'll get into that language later when we look at code. We had to be mindful of including some resources to where it wasn't considered advertising. So there were certain folks we could include and certain ways we could phrase things to where it didn't favor one over the other. We included you know, pet food stores, groomers, pet resorts, pet sitting services, veterinarians, and services like low-cost spay-neuter clinics and events, pet-friendly events. Beach and boardwalk rules, general do's and don'ts, the leash law, and just some subsequent FYI links regarding pets. I also thought, and I think we had talked about it in meetings earlier last year about service dog language, so we thought it best to include that as well so it's clearly stated on the city website. One more recent addition that I researched to look into was emergency evacuation information for folks with animals. I will say, quite honestly, I was a little disappointed in, and I know this is public, a little disappointed in the the state of Delaware pet tips that they give for evacuating with pets. It's quite disappointing. And you know, and I do understand it was probably written some time ago, but you know, it basically stated to leave your pet behind in a crate, which you know we all tend to not encourage anyone to do. So that might be something you know, a separate group can look at updating, but still to keep that information consistent on the website. There are resources for folks on there as well. Animal emergencies, I actually was in touch with somebody from the Delaware Council of Wildlife Rehabilitators last weekend for a hurt fox, I think it was. So I did include their information as well as Tri-State and MER for folks that may have found or have an experience with something like that. So those additions have been sent. Always welcome to have more. I think we'll do it when Dick and I met with Chris. I think we thought it, and she thought it best to kind of send things a little bit at a time so they can kind of fit in. And again, by no means do we want to just completely overcomplicate and flood the website with all animal stuff, but I thought these would be helpful and relatively concise.
Questions, discussion, concerns, ideas, anything? Okay. Well, I mean, we're in a lot better shape than we were. We certainly want to encourage people to use the website. We have a sense that they do, and hopefully this will be very helpful. And as you look at the website, you know, send in ideas, or if you see concerns, if you see something that can be improved in our realm, you know, we can work at that. And So Cheryl, do you see a next step with that?
I think it's kind of like a consistent review, just to see if there's anything helpful. You know, we have these resources kind of come up every now and again where it's something new, but you know, I think honestly a lot of these additions are not necessarily new to anyone. It's new to the website in terms of accessing the information. So I think it's just you know, another valuable piece of information that we can put out through the city website. Not reinventing the wheel, just creating another avenue to find that information relatively quickly.
Good, good. Thank you much.
Sure.
Let's move right into Chapter 88, the Animal Code for the City of Rehoboth Beach.
All right, everybody. Sorry to overwhelm all of you, but I made you all folders. I was a teacher about 15 years ago. Yeah, so don't smile too much.
No. You keep the one with your name on it.
And I'll look at Ray's.
We don't know.
That's a
what
dead
happened.
tree.
Not with us. I know, it's a lot of paper.
But it's not a tree from Rehoboth Beach.
Yeah,
Right.
it's a tree from
Maybe get
Sable.
2 copies? I think I have 4 at this point.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's since we've gotten computers.
So, this is probably going to be, at first glance, relatively overwhelming, which is understandable. It's a lot of information all at once. But between Dick and I and you know, some other resources, I've taken some time over the last year to look at some best practices, look at some examples, and look at some ideas for altering and revising the way City Code stands as it is in terms of language protecting mostly dogs. I mean, I know everybody, we had looked at the cat language not long ago, and I had zero intention of doing anything with that because it just doesn't make sense. This is basically updating some of the language and the verbiage for animal welfare, animal control. There are some sections in City Code currently that are just not valid. That truthfully, I think it's one of those things that they could probably be omitted and revised with some more consistent and concise language. So upon first glance, this looks like a whole lot of writing and a whole lot of paper. I think the idea was to consolidate, make it clean, make it easy, and make it relevant. So where we stood, or where we stand now, is going through this and getting thoughts on whether these modifications are something that everyone feels are necessary, and also an improvement to what is currently in code. And then the next step would be to, to sit down and basically reorganize and kind of put things in where they belong. It's a lot of arrows, it's a lot of language all over the place, but that's just how it is right now. So I'm not sure, Dick, if we think the best idea is for me to kind of read through everything, or if anybody wants to read through anything. I know we've all received this in some way, shape, or form to kind of just peek at, and I certainly didn't want to put the responsibility on any one person to proofread or to to kind of go through it. But I do think everyone's input is very important. By no means do I want to be the sole the sole person revising this, because obviously there are a lot of valuable ideas and thoughts at this table.
I think that, there's 10 pages as it's printed out here, and I don't think we want to read everything.
Right.
But I think
I'll stand.
where there's a change being suggested,
Yes.
let's go page by page and touch on those. And it looks like 10 pages of a lot of information.
Yeah.
There's not that many.
Right, and this is current code as it stands. Everything in red and yellow is an addition or some type of modification.
And let me just add, Cheryl and I have gone through this a couple of times, and then we sat in, it was just prior to Christmas, in December with Chief Banks, and we went page by page through it with the police chief, because there are some enforcement kinds of things, and so we thought we need to be filtering this through a variety of people as it moves along, and we wanted to touch base with the police right away. And so we did. He gave us some thoughts, some ideas. He said he would review it with his two lieutenants and anyone else he thought, and get back to us. And when he came back to me a month or so later, he said they just didn't have anything to add. And so as we continue to tweak this, and so on, we'll get to the point where as a committee, we agree with the changes, the updates, the omissions, and then we will sit with the city solicitor or city attorney and go over it, and then he will raise issues if he has any, and then we'll begin to put it into a format that makes sense. And once he's satisfied with it and we are satisfied, then we can bring it to the commissioners. And just to reiterate what I've said before, we're under no deadline on this. So we're doing this in a sense voluntarily. However, the mayor did challenge all of the committees a year and a half ago to take a look at code and begin to review, to try to get things up to date. And so I think we're on that work, and it's moving along quite well, and a lot of this is good, and I think we can have some discussion. So Cheryl, do you just want to begin on page one?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can kind of add to that in terms of the reasoning of doing this. I think obviously it's a good time since code hasn't been updated in quite some time. But there's also a lot of a lot more, I guess, issues facing the city with a lot more people coming in. Some things that I'm going to talk about in terms of additions can seem overwhelming. And I think when we get to those points, I'll kind of explain the thought process behind those. So just to prepare everyone, in this folder, you'll have the 10 pages of code. There are a couple other documents that I've included that are language. They're examples of language that I've pulled from experience and other resources that I'd like to try to find ways to insert. Now, that doesn't mean because something's 8 pages long that it's going to be inserted as 8 pages long. These are suggestions and ideas for basically modernizing and improving our language. So we'll just start on page 1. The first insertion comes where animal control officer, we're striking the person appointed by the mayor. This is the person who would be appointed by the Office of Animal Welfare, Delaware Health and Social Services, to enforce any animal control laws or regulations. This shall include, but not be limited to, any City of Rehoboth Beach police officer or state police. That's an addition. I think we can all agree that that's relevant, that those folks will and can enforce.
Let me ask a question. The Division of Health and Social Services has animal control people?
Their Division of Health and Social Services is Office of Animal Welfare.
Office of Animal Welfare
that's
falls
right.
under
Yeah.
that.
That's right.
Yeah.
And
Under that
OAW
agency.
means
Office of Animal Welfare.
there's two. There's two groups
One.
of.
No, they're together. They're together. Yeah, so
So-
Office of Animal Welfare is through DHSS.
So what does DHSS do that OAW doesn't?
They're essentially one entity.
So why don't we just say OAW?
We can. Yeah.
So the mayor's not going to appoint it, it'll be,
It's a statewide
State.
agency.
Okay.
Yeah.
The state,
Yeah.
yeah, it makes
So
sense.
that's one of those things where it's kind of.
It's a department
I
with,
have problems with letters,
yeah, okay. So,
especially since I didn't know what it meant.
so the Office of Animal Welfare is like a department
I
in the
know,
agency.
Patty Blevins.
Yeah, well, was, no longer,
No
but
longer.
yes.
Okay,
That's
so
a shame, took that
moving-
job away from her.
moving on to the definition of a leash. I wanted to be a little bit more clear and added the language a cord hooked or fastened or chain not to exceed. I took out the 8 feet and added 6 and thought that 8 feet is, it's pretty long. I can't necessarily see a real strong argument either way, but I think consistency and when you look at 8 feet versus 6 feet, you know, it's a decent difference to be able to have control of an animal. Again, by no means do we want to lay the iron fist and start really cracking down on things, but I think it's a small change that really essentially wouldn't bring any argument. The language, basically just getting a little bit more clearer about the definition of a leash attached to any animal by collar or slip lead handled and directed from one end by any person. Again, just makes that a lot clearer. Our definitions were pretty, we're pretty vague. So if there's no objection to that, I think those are sensible additions. When we talked about the definition of a service animal going to the line under owner, this would just add another definition to this definition block of 88-1. That definition is not in there, and I think it makes sense that we modernize and bring up to date the code and add that addition.
So if I harbor a stray dog, I'm an owner.
Owning, keeping, or harboring, you are at the time.
Okay. Makes it easy.
Yeah. Is owning and fostering different?
Yeah, that's still owning, isn't it? You're harboring.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can modify
The
that.
problem is owner,
Mhm.
but I don't know what to suggest. Because we're getting away from that concept, so it's kind of
Right.
hard for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's something we can certainly.
Leave it until somebody sues.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, that's the kind of thing that, we can rely on our solicitor to
But this
parse
is also
those
good,
words
'cause
as he
this-
goes through too.
Right, and this
to
is
see
the
if he
whole
has a
point.
concern.
Is to see different viewpoints,
Can I
because
ask
one
you
person may
question?
read it
What's a
differently.
slip lead?
Slip lead.
What is it?
It's like a slip knot. It's like a I know it through like sewing, but you basically like
Attached to an animal by
make a
collar
loop and
or
stick it
slip
through.
lead.
It's like the shelter leashes that have like one
Oh,
little.
okay.
The tighter you pull, the tighter it
Okay,
gets.
it's a noose.
If you just take a
Basically,
leash
yes.
and put it around and then through.
You got that
yeah,
right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we won't use that word.
So I think that makes us onto page 2. On to page 2, enforcement, appointment of animal control officers, since we just did that. I lined this item out. I think that makes sense, if anyone thinks otherwise. And animals running at large. Now, I do understand the point of this section. However, it does not discuss anything to do with dogs. It's horses, cows, sheep, and goats, which is fine. There's possibility for anything. But I think that we can retitle it or omit it. I don't know what the thoughts are on that, but when we talk, there's a subsequent section that does talk and speak to dogs at large specifically. So this is animals in terms of non-domesticated animal. Well, I can't say that because goats and sheep, but in city limits, we don't have that. So I don't know the thoughts on taking that out, renaming it, moving it, scratching it. I'm not sure what the consensus is there.
I would think that you'd have to keep something in place so that someone doesn't decide to bring a goat or something like that to their property because there's nothing that says they can't.
Okay, that makes sense. So, perhaps we can retitle it livestock and fowl, keep it the way it is with it lined out, and be done. That subsequent section underneath, housing and conditions of animals, again speaks to not dogs or cats, speaks to cows, sheep, horses, and hogs. So I thought it was probably a good idea to line that out. Right above this section with the lost found dog policy, there's a draft in this folder that we'll look at as we get further down, so we'll take a look at that. Some of the insertions are a little bit inconsistent, that's not the word I was looking for, but, so, you know, where I'm inserting things may not be the most sensible, so if there's a question, certainly let me know. Noisy animals. So this particular section, the language does read just fine. There is an attachment which you don't necessarily need to find, but I'll go through it, that speaks to noisy animals. It basically just adds language that speaks to perpetual noise. And I know we don't want to get extremely overcomplicated, but I also think it's something that we could certainly include that that may prevent some situations from escalating. Frequent and continued noise so as to disturb the comfort or repose of any person in the vicinity. There's no language that speaks to violation per se. I think that's probably something to think about. If anyone has any thoughts about that. Like I said, there is a very detailed rewriting of this section in our attachment. If anyone wants to take a look at that and figure out whether that's something that we want to
Sure.
make a little clearer.
What would be the rationale for wanting to be more detailed than?
Basically, you know, I think
I'm not arguing against it. I'm
yeah,
just-
no, I think only because it is very, I don't want to say vague, but when you think about continued noise, is the continued noise a barking, a howling, a scratching, you know, those kinds of things? Do we want to get that specific? Maybe not. Do we have problems with that? I don't know. You know, and that might be something to where we look at noise complaints. What are the noise complaints? How many of them are there? Do we have to address it? Do we not?
When we talked with the chief that day, he said it was very, very infrequent, that there were ever concerns about barking dogs, or other animal
Last
noises.
one was a commissioner, and he got a felonious result.
We did, however, have a situation that was brought to this committee's attention last year about a barking.
Yes.
So,
Right, right.
But you know, that I think that's in essence, this is the point of going over these things to see if there is a need or if there isn't a need. You know, by no means do we want to overkill and make 10 pages into 30 when it's not warranted. But if there's a section we feel like could be warranted, I think it's certainly worth it. So, you know, that I think we can all kind of, you know, put aside and really kind of think and discuss that if anyone wants to look at the language and kind of, you know, come up with any suggestion or insertion, that's fantastic. If not, you know, we'll move past it, and that can be something that when we meet again or meet with the city solicitor that we talk about. I think that
I mean, you know, that for me, the common sense part of this is that if someone perceives a violation of this, that they call the local police, and then the police intervene and they make a decision. They work with the party, and you know, and that's what I said, of course, to this neighbor of ours last fall. But you know, his situation was such he didn't want to. You know, it's that whole
He's
thing.
scared.
Yeah, some people are afraid. They don't want to complain because they think it'll come back at them. But that we can't deal with. What we can deal with is what is a common sense approach. And to me, a common sense approach is that if someone perceives it to be a nuisance, the police intervene and they deal with it. And, you know, and we are saying that,
Well, I think living in town, we Americans know, first go to the person that's annoying us, and if that doesn't work, you have to make a step up because we're on top of each other.
Yeah.
I think my inclination would be to try to just keep it simple,
Oh, yeah,
rather than add more to it.
sure.
Which is definitely understandable, because I think there's other sections that really might warrant a little bit more detailed language. So I think that's fine. And again, by no means does all of this, you know, these attachments and all of the subsequent language mean that it has to be in here. This is my culmination of looking at other municipalities' language on the state level, some things to try to bring us ahead and bring us up. So that, you know, we can put a big old TBD there, but I you know, tend to think as reading it, and maybe that is an area that can be left more simple. When we get to Article 2, dogs, cats, and other animals, some of the language I think, again, is a little older. License required, you know, obviously there's a state license that's required. I think the instance of folks actually going through with that is, I don't remember the exact number, but it's pretty low. I think it's just not something that people do consistently like they should. Animal control officers do check that and do ask for that, but a lot of folks at times don't have it. So, you know, adding just the simple language that it's a valid state license tag, so they have proof of a state license. That's what animal welfare will request whenever there's a complaint or an issue. In pursuance of laws with the state, so that's consistent. There's a fine there. So that addition I don't think is necessarily groundbreaking, but it makes it a little bit more clear that it's a state license tag, and it has to be presented. Skipping the little yellow box, no person shall own or have control of any dog over 6 months of age unless a license tag is able to be presented at all times. Now I know I don't have a license tag around my dog's neck, so I think that it's able to be presented is probably enough, instead of being
I'm not
worn.
sure that's the right language, but it's correct. Dogs are rare colors, especially little dogs.
Yeah.
what does the state,
It ruins the line.
okay.
Yeah, from my experience and from what I've experienced, as long as you have documentation that you have a license, it does not have to be
And
worn.
produce documentation at any time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And there is state law language. Do we include it? Probably not. But there is state law language that explains that each resident in the state of Delaware that owns and harbors an animal, a dog, has to have a license.
And what do we do about a female dog with 13 puppies?
Where? We
That's
got rid of
ignored.
her.
It's not in this code,
Wait a minute.
but I'll get there.
I mean, if you have a litter of 13 puppies,
Yeah.
don't complain.
I understand, but it says a limit of 4.
Oh, no,
It's
we haven't gotten there
the same
yet.
as the county.
Oh, so I'm going to go up to this little yellow box now that you mentioned that. So when Dick and I met with Chief Banks and we kind of talked about it, these were extremely ambitious goals and language that we kind of threw out there, kind of like what if. And, you know, we had talked about, should we include some language that no resident of the city limits, within city limits, shall own, control, or confine more than 4 dogs on any property. And in talking with him, he kind of told us, you know, we've not really had any complaints about a number of animals. You could have one that's louder than somebody else's 4. So I put this in here, and we had marked it up and marked it off. This is the original that I put out. So this was an item that we had thought about, like, wow, that would make sense, but do we do that? So, you know, thoughts on that and whether we even need to make a
Well, the county has 4. and
Exactly.
If you have more than 4, you apply for
for a
kennel
license.
I think that's simple.
Doesn't
We
happen
apply
as
for
often
kennel.
as we,
Let's do that.
yeah.
And
doesn't
since we
happen
don't
as often.
have kennel licenses,
No,
Um,
but that's through the county.
yeah,
So I think we all felt comfortable that that was something that we could strike because
You have to have commercial property.
it wasn't necessarily a quantity thing as it was a care thing. Next section,
Yeah,
harboring.
the other thing to add on that is that most rental licenses for rental properties indicate a maximum number. And I know most HOAs have in their bylaws a maximum number. In our townhouses, we have in our bylaws a maximum
You probably
number.
have weight too.
Some of them do, yeah.
Well, we don't, and it's a good thing.
Like 30.
But,
Marcia's right. One dog can cause the same problems as 13 puppies, but.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And my problem with it is who gets to count? Can I call and complain about Marcia, who has 5 dogs, and they're gonna come and count? It just seems like it's
Yeah.
adding, I think we should deal with the disease, not the symptoms.
Sure, yep, that makes
Yes.
sense. And on original review of this, I mean, this culmination is the most ambitious, overcomplicated overkill of any code that exists. So the whole point is to take this, read it all, and just hash, we're gonna take things away, we're probably not gonna add anymore, but we're gonna take a lot of this away to peel back and find the best insertions to move forward. So by no means does everything have to go forward. And honestly, I wanted everybody to take a look at this too, because as I read it, things are kind of all over the place, and some of the titles and sections don't align. So now we're going to strayed or stolen dogs when we haven't even gotten to stray animals quite yet. So, I thought that this section needed to be moved to the end relative to the lost and found
You're at the
section.
bottom.
At 88-9.
Just back to the license for a second. Do we need 2 categories? License required, license tag?
No,
Could that be folded into one?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I come back to what Bob said.
I
I
think
think
just
that's so
license
important.
required is enough.
Keep it simple, straightforward.
yeah. And again,
And if
that's.
it's too long, nobody will read it.
Exactly, yeah. Try to keep it as consistent as possible. And you're right, I mean, there are some sections that just need to either be really narrowed down or omitted altogether. And some of these things, we really don't necessarily have an issue, but, it's relevant. So yeah, 88-9, we thought about moving down somewhere to the end. I don't know where yet, but that's that. And then moving on to vicious dogs, cats, or other animals. I didn't touch this a whole lot. I know that the Office of Animal Welfare and state police, they have their own protocols for dangerous animals. There really wasn't anything in here that I thought would hurt or benefit us either way by changing. So I kind of kept it the same, just changing the language with, in section B, it shall be the duty of the Office of Animal Welfare and the Animal Control Officer or Chief of Police to receive and investigate complaints. Not sure how much more simple we could get than that. As we get down into section 8811, injuring or slaying dogs prohibited. Obviously, that's cruelty. There's a language in here that no one shall poison a dog or harm a dog, kill a dog, anything like that within city limits. I can't imagine that that's anything we're gonna change. The language at 8812, dangerous dogs or cats, any other animals may be slain. We've got the definition of a dangerous dog. Do we? No. Is that something we want to open up, or is that not really anybody's main concern?
I think that the way it reads, it's only in the case that it cannot be taken up or tranquilized and pounded, so it would be a very rare circumstance.
Right. And I think we're kind of tossing a ball that's not really, not really anything we deal or specialize in.
I jumped over, Is it necessary for the police department to keep a record? I mean, the OAW is already keeping a record. Is it okay with Chief Banks that he keeps, if he even knows about the, you know?
Mhm.
And the other, I think, no, not more than $250 is too low. It should be $1,000, between 1 and 1,000.
Between 100 and 1,000?
I think 250, I mean, who cares?
Yeah.
I mean, in Rehoboth.
Sure. I mean, I can definitely be on board with that.
And
The only-
again, Glenn will fiddle with that.
Sure. With that section E that you brought up, the department shall keep a record of all vicious dogs, cats, and other animals. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that a lot of municipalities do have their local and city officers keep track, just from a safety standpoint.
If he doesn't mind doing it.
I would think.
I
I
don't
mean, we can ask him, doesn't one exist?
Going back to the injuring or slaying dogs prohibited, why wouldn't it be animals?
That's a good point.
Mhm.
How about just mammals?
Animals,
What about fish?
nothing alive. Why are we,
Dog, cat, or other animal.
No hurting the critters.
So where would we insert or change that?
Dangerous animals may be slain.
but in section
Well, wait a minute, we
11,
don't slay them because they're dangerous. We slay them because they acted out.
Well, because they're posing a threat. They're posing a current threat.
Again, Glenn can fiddle with that.
Yeah. I think that's right, because, by no
I was
means do we
looking-
want to change it to where anybody can,
There's not
Say
a
that
cat
somebody
in
barked
America
at them
that isn't
and-
dangerous.
yeah.
I was looking at section 11.
I don't necessarily love the section. If it were up to me, I'd take it out, and not give anybody the ability to do that, but that's not real world. I don't think that's realistic. And that's a perfect world, of course. Female dogs in heat, 8813, I took this out
Of
completely,
course.
because that's gonna fall on Office of
Female
Animal
dogs
Welfare.
misleading the male dogs that are allowed to walk around. It's not fair.
But I think that's something that the city itself will not and does not handle and shouldn't really have any, probably doesn't want any responsibility for handling.
And we have a leash law anyway.
Yep.
So
Yep,
no dog should be running around at large.
exactly, yep. Moving on to 8814, injury to property and nuisances, didn't really change anything except for in section B, just writing that the city leash law shall apply. That might be redundant, but why not? In section C, just changing the seeing eye dog to service animal, so opening up that to also include service animals. D was kept the same.
So it would be service animal, period, not, we
Mhm.
wouldn't
Yes.
have the rest of that sentence there.
Exactly.
The red would go all the way to the end of the
Yep.
sentence.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly, yep, that makes sense. Moving on to, right before Article 3, we do have a leash law, we do have a poop scoop law. I don't know if it makes sense to insert those. I don't know, I mean, I know they're obviously a little more informal, but I don't know if that makes sense to include those into that section or not. If anyone has any suggestions, the language is in this lovely booklet I put together for you. It is in the packet that starts, I think the first page of the packet, but it's nothing that I'm sure any of us are unfamiliar with, but I can read it and just keep it really simple. The city of Rehoboth Beach shall enforce a citywide leash law on dogs. Any person owning, having control of, or harboring any dog within the city shall keep such dog confined to the premises and or proximity of such person, except as specifically provided in this section. It shall be unlawful for any person owning, having control of, or harboring any dog within the city to permit such dog to run at large within the city, or to permit the dog to go on any public street, sidewalk, right-of-way, yard, park, beach, unless it is kept, secured by a leash or lead or other means of restraint, not harmful or injurious to the dog, and under the control of a responsible person capable of physically restraining the dog.
So that would,
We don't have that anywhere in here now. I was just trying to
We
get through.
We don't. As a matter of fact, I had to look it up in a separate section in code.
No,
And I'm not
I think we definitely should incorporate
sure
the
where.
leash
Raw
law.
language in the.
so that would
Yeah.
go under 8815,
I think,
dogs running
yeah, I think that makes
large,
sense.
prohibited,
Mm-hmm.
and then it would replace maybe A, or what would you just read? Or
I would
it-
probably, yeah, you're right, put it in maybe A. So 8815A. And just scratch that. And then there is the poop scoop language. I don't know if that's
Where are you?
relevant enough to include this in injury to property and nuisances. If that's something that you think would be wise to put in there.
So to go back up above,
Mhm.
and there's no language there, is there, about that?
There's not.
Yeah.
There's not.
I
And I
thought
don't know
read
if,
it.
you know, again, to not overcomplicate things, but at the same time, do we include it? And there is language for that in this packet. It's relatively simple that any person whose animal, you know, decides to, you know.
I think it should be in the code,
Mhm.
the leash and the poop scoop part, especially if we're going to discuss the possibility of containers and that type of thing.
Mhm.
So maybe we can include it. But now, do we think we include it in the injury to property and nuisance section? Or dogs running at large? Probably doesn't make sense in dogs running at large.
No.
Yeah, because we're not supposed to have dogs running.
Under the
around.
property and nuisance,
Yeah,
I think make the most sense.
I agree.
Okay. When we look at dogs running at large, or I'm sorry, section 3, impoundment of dogs, there's no language under that, and it looks like it was amended, adopted, and changed at some point, but I think that that's something that we don't really need at this point. There's language in for the city holding stray dogs. I think we're pretty good at omitting that. In discussing with Chief Banks, they do have a temporary holding area, an ability to hold. I'm not sure if that's something we want to include, and I think it does, you know, and again, this jumps around a lot. It is included on the next page.
Just want to make sure we take out the Town of Dewey Beach language.
Oh, whoops.
That gets,
Yikes.
No,
it's in
we're
there a couple of
discussing
times.
impoundment of dogs, right? We haven't
Yes.
gone to dogs running at large.
Let's see, where are we now? Impoundment of dogs running at large. I think that we get this, I think that we get a lot of this on this next page. Delivery of dogs, impound.
Oh, authority to impound, I got
Mhm.
you. Okay.
So, and before we get where it says dogs running at large prohibited, this little red section here, I had played with some language for other municipalities to include a lost and found pet policy. This is, you know, very, very brief and vague language. There's actually something just a little more detailed and not as long in this packet that we have here. I mean, it's a lot of information kind of compiled together, so we can certainly play with that if we need. I don't know if we necessarily want to go through the task of creating a lost dog policy, if that's something that we think needs to be done. I'm kind of the
Well,
mindset that.
what it says here, I mean, if we substituted City of Rehoboth Beach
Mhm.
for a couple of places where it says Town of Dewey Beach,
Mhm.
I think that's fairly good.
It's relatively concise,
Yeah.
and it would be
Yeah.
consistent with both.
Yeah, I like that.
And the
commu- or
last
both
sentence really
municipalities.
sums it up.
Okay, good. So we
Yes.
will kind of include that into, now what section do we think that that should be?
Well, that might fall under dogs running at large.
Yeah, so maybe we can make it, if we can move C to D, I don't know if that's a possibility, and add it as item, or not, letter C, lost and found. Pet policy, it's very simple and relatively consistent. And some of this language kind of comes from something else we're going to talk about with the Better Cities for Pets. Some of that verbiage and that mindset comes from there. So we're moving on to the next item as an addition at dogs running at large prohibited. In the yellow box where it says no dog shall be tethered at any time within 100 feet of any school, library, or child care center. This is language pulled from samples of state codes to prevent dog bites, and also to basically increase the minimum standards of what you would require with tethered dogs. This is kind of an insertion where I think the mindset was to be a little bit more preemptive and raise the bar for some of the minimum standards that we have on a state level, to just kind of bring us above that.
I don't know why we have to have a permit tethering in dog houses, period. And
I
again,
agree with
there's-
you, but if you
there's
say you can't, you
symptoms,
can.
It's anticipating a disease,
Yeah.
but it's inhumane.
Right, but unfortunately, if there's nothing in here that says you can't, you can do it all day long. I think that's why.
But does the city of Rehoboth really want dog houses, dog enclosures?
No, we don't. Yeah.
No,
And
and there are
dogs
state
tied out?
regulations,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we can't supersede state regulations.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
maybe, that's, give a lot and get something.
So going to the tethering, I mean, what do we, is that something that we don't think is, or do? Because this is an awful ambitious dose. I just want to make sure we're
Well,
making
clearly,
progress.
we don't want dogs running at large.
I mean,
That should be enough.
yeah. But unfortunately, running at large and being tethered, two different circumstances with two different
Any person who has control.
sets of results.
Keep the dog in the bedroom.
Well, number 2, firmly secured. I mean, that's tethering, right?
I love the chain.
And I think this is where we get, it's kind of, it can be a little bit overwhelming because we're looking at issues that we don't necessarily have, but the idea is to, I guess, make sure that that's not ever a problem.
In some respects, dogs running at large is the same as injury to property, nuisances. And then for some reason, we've added the tethering and the chaining and all that stuff. But isn't all we're saying is that they're not to be running at large off their own property?
Yes, and I think the intent with the tethering language is so they're not perpetually, you don't have an animal that's perpetually stuck outside. Whether it's in a doghouse, whether it's on a chain, whether it's.
Or if it's in a fenced yard.
Yeah.
Is the state language helpful?
At this point, no.
No.
Yeah, the state language is vague. I mean, it is, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
I was comfortable the state was gonna do an anti-tethering law, but
Well, it's in the works.
They've tried.
But
in the
it's a lot
past,
more
and-
complicated, and I will be 100% honest with you and tell you that the initiative to get these things in city code on a smaller level is a big push, so that it's a lot more acceptable and mainstream on the state level, so that folks can see and say, you know, this municipality, this town, this city, it's in their code that you can't tether an animal outside in a hurricane. You can't leave your dog outside in 90-degree heat all day long, that they're enforcing that. And I know there's different levels of enforcement depending on the city and town that you're in, because here, we're likely not gonna have the instance of that occurrence frequently, although I've seen it happen in the summertime where folks are here and they just decide to tie their dog up to the deck and go out to the beach, and then you've got an animal that's out there for
and
4 hours.
again, that really borders on cruelty
Mhm.
in the heat.
It does, but it won't unless it says it does. And I think, again, not to overkill, but pulling a lot of that is what you'll find to be included as additions. And not, again, it's way more preemptive than I think we all, it's way more preventative.
Well, is there kind of common sense type statement that deals with, you know, the inclement weather, the over 90 degrees?
Not currently in state language, no.
Not in our state, but there must be in some states.
Yes, and you will find
some
it in this packet.
municipalities.
You know, we could say every time, dogs aren't allowed to be running at large, or at any time the dog is off his own property, it has to be on a 6-foot leash.
Mhm. Right.
Yeah.
And then there's the language
And
of,
we'll fight the tethering thing as it comes down the pike.
Mhm.
And again,
And
most
you're
dogs.
suggesting, though, do we want to be more bold than that
Yeah,
and put another statement in there that,
yes.
that indicates that it is cruelty
Mhm.
to have a dog tied up in 90-degree heat
Mhm.
or during
Right,
storms?
and we
or
make
during-
sure-
When everybody's in the house.
Sure. And does it happen? Sure, it does. It does, and it will. You know, we necessarily, you know, before really putting any of this on paper, you know, we looked at the biggest effect is obviously gonna be on our city officers. And in our conversation with Chief Banks, you know, we asked, do you think this is gonna be a big tax? Is this going to be a big burden on anyone? And, you know, his response was, no.
And he said no, primarily based on past history, that we haven't
That
been,
we're in good shape, that we don't
that we
necessarily have
haven't
this.
been having those kinds of problems.
And so I guess it comes to us as a group, you know, weighing that thought of, do we want to be progressive and be kind of the leaders of this kind of language in our city code? As it stands, I think there's only 2 towns and cities that have language that includes a temperature restriction, that you can't have an animal tied outside if it's above 90 degrees, and you can't have an animal tied outside if it's below 32 degrees
I don't think you should have
for
animals.
certain time frames.
Say that again, Libby?
I don't believe we should permit animals to be tied up,
Yeah,
period.
so these communities are in Delaware. I mean, it seems to me to take, we've got A, B, C, and then numbers under B. If we could condense that down to just a couple of statements that are pretty straightforward.
And, you know, these attachments are extremely wordy, because this is every possible way to say everything. Does it belong in here? Absolutely not. You know, it's again, like pulling the very, very, you know, fine, refined language to go in here. And so, you know, if there's one extra item or one extra line that says, you know, you cannot have any animal, dog, cat, bird, whatever, confined by tethered chain or cage below 32, above 90, that's for a municipal police officer to come out and take a temperature and see that that's happening. I mean, that's black and white. It's not
It is.
him stopping out every 5 minutes wondering if it's, perpetual.
Is there an objection against drafting something like that we look at?
I think we
That
should
would
take,
go in here and get rid of a lot
we
of
formed
this
this committee
detail?
because we cared about animals.
Yeah.
And I think, we've done a lot and gone along with a lot, but I think we need to go to the head of the line instead of,
Mhm. So you could pull out what these other communities have
Mhm.
and take a look at it. I
Cheryl
mean,
knows.
we don't want a page of detail
Cheryl
because,
knows what it should be.
yeah, yeah. And so,
Yeah.
My attitude is, I think we
And this,
put a draft of that statement or statements
Right.
in here.
Yeah. I mean, this
And,
draft
I try to
of
go
code
forward
is-
with
is-
something. I mean, right now, this is just kind of a mixed up.
Yeah.
This is
Well,
very
like
mixed
stuff.
up, so.
Yeah.
it's
Running at
extremely
large and
mixed up.
being a nuisance
Yeah.
are really the same thing.
Mhm. So I think we're all of the mindset that, yeah, we can include this language as long as it's very simple, very clean.
Mhm.
It's not 8 pages, which again, I apologize for the attachments, but I have enjoyed pulling code from all over the place and finding where it fits and how it doesn't. So I think that's the
What are the communities that have
Better
that
than not.
language? Those two?
The town of Smyrna does have a climate provision, which is reflective of a lot of proposed language for the state, and it's
Mhm.
also reflective of some other municipalities that have tried to do the same thing.
Good.
It is pretty consistent across the board when you look at the Humane Society and different organizations that have made that standard of this degree, this level of temperature, and the clear definition of a storm or a inclement weather. And that's included in this lovely packet as well. So, I think, yeah, taking this section where we have dogs running at large, and including some very basic tethering language to
And climate
explain.
provision, like you
Yep.
So
said.
why don't we want dogs running at large? Why don't we?
So they run in front of your car and you slam on the brakes.
Because something might happen, not
Right.
because they're running at large is intrinsically a wrong thing.
Exactly.
Mhm.
It's
It's a
because something
consequence.
might
Right.
happen.
Right.
Consequence
like
to the
having
animals.
4
and the
dogs.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something
I'm glad you
might
see it that
happen.
way.
Remember,
I-
that's
Yeah.
16 feet.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I mean, that's exactly the point of this. It's not attacking a situation right now. It's preventing it from happening so we don't ever have to deal with it. And I honestly think, I do think we're going to have a bigger fight after this is cleaned up and after this is made solid, because a lot of folks are going to see it from that other viewpoint of why complicate, why create a situation that's not there. So I think that's a argument
We're
will
lucky that
happen
we,
in
except for
future.
maybe tenants, we have a pretty intelligent
Yeah, so
population.
I think keep it simple,
Mhm.
Yeah,
keep it
that's called KISS.
straightforward,
Yes,
yes.
less is more,
Yeah,
which I've never believed in, but
and common sense, and I think, yeah,
Yes.
there's rationale for those things.
absolutely. So that brings us down,
Okay, we're only on page 4, so we need to.
yeah, we're on page 4. Let's keep it moving.
Yep.
So we'll move to page 4, dogs or other animals prohibited from the beach. That's pretty simple. Seeing eye dogs.
And
changes
remember,
service
today
dogs.
is the last day on the boardwalk, by the way.
Oh, glad you reminded me that. Authority to impound, just changing that language to be a little bit more flexible. Each police officer or the animal control officer may apprehend a dog running at large, not shall. I think there's other avenues. That was really the only thing I put on here. Increasing these fees, we don't really have, I think Chief Banks had mentioned they've never charged anybody
Right,
for
they
holding their
don't.
dog. So whether there's an increase or not, I don't think it really matters, but maybe that's an opportunity to revise that so that there is an opportunity to to do that if necessary, if they
So that
find it
if they
necessary.
choose to do it, yes.
Sure, or if you have an owner that maybe just didn't really feel like
And I-
coming that day.
I think that our fee should be commensurate with what the SPCA charges, because most likely the dog was with us, the city, for more than 10 hours, it would be transported to the SPCA.
Uh-huh.
And they do have a set charge.
Mhm.
So I think it should be the same.
Sure.
Should be what?
The same as the SPCA charges for a daily
I want to
fee.
say it's $50.
I think it is too, but I'll check to confirm, just to make sure.
Okay,
I think you're right.
that makes good sense, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
We don't want people dropping them dogs off at.
For daycare.
$10
Rabbit's
a
cheap,
day.
it's
That's
only
pretty
good
cheap.
fun.
You take care of him.
I'll be back.
Oh, my
Be
gosh.
back in a week. That's
See, you
a
just
good
never
deal.
know what thoughts will come up when heads get together, because I would have never thought about
Yeah,
that.
see,
That's
Libby's already
fantastic.
booking her next vacation with her pups at the police office.
Disposition of unclaimed dogs. I didn't really mark this up, but there's language in here that basically, I don't know if we need to take it out or if it's just something that's not a problem till it's a problem. That last line about animal control officer may release a dog to a person other than the owner upon payment of the charge. Any dog which appears to be suffering from rabies or affected with hydrophobia, mange, or other infectious disease now shall be released, but shall be destroyed. I don't know. I don't know. That's a little sticky because I'm not sure that the city has ever kept a dog. And you're right, Bob. They'd send it over to who wouldn't send it to the SPCA as soon as.
They'd call the OAW officer and come pick it up right away.
So
Mhm.
do we
Yeah.
strike this altogether?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yep, keep it simple. And sometimes when you don't give someone responsibility, there's less of a chance that something's gonna happen to come back on them. And then delivery of an impounded dog, that's fine. The city will hand it over to the SPCA or any agent thereof. Rabies is pretty self-explanatory. Section 8823, examination of biting dog or cat to determine rabies. Nobody from the city's doing that.
Good
So
point. I'll be right back.
I struck that, if there's any objection to that. Confining an animal which has attacked or bitten a person. It basically says that they can quarantine or hold the animal in charge per day, but again, we're not necessarily doing that. Examination of animals by either police department or animal control officer. Examine the animal at any reasonable time, 10 days after they attacked or bitten a person to determine whether the animal shows any symptoms of rabies. The city's not doing that, but I mean, I think it's wise to leave that language in there in case there is a concern that they can go back and check.
The state is doing all of that.
What do we think? Do we think it's,
The cat police come to your door. So when you go to the doctors with
Oh,
a
yeah.
cut, you say you did it on a spade in the yard.
Yeah, don't tell them your cat did it, or they do call on you.
really?
I've already had to lie to him twice. It was a very dirty nail.
So what do we think about that? 88, 24, 25, and
I think
26 and 27?
I would say that
I think the state,
the state, all handled by the state.
Okay.
it's not complicated.
See, a lot of the onus of doing what we're doing is because of the onset of the Office of Animal Welfare.
Yeah.
And we don't have to worry about these things anymore because
Which
the
is-
state is taking control of it. So
Yeah.
I'd just say eliminate it.
Right, and you know,
Let them do it.
right, and just, you know, for consideration, I think it's, maybe we can think about, look, we're taking out now 1, 2, 3, 4, almost 5 sections. So is this an opportunity for us to, you know, again, not go overboard with some of that language, but like get in depth with our not in depth, but keep that tethering language and keep that climate provision
That's right.
language, because we're not expanding code.
No.
We're taking it and minimizing it and making it relevant instead of.
And it rightfully should be handled by the state.
So, okay, I struck 8827, 8828, permit to release animals. Do we think that that shall also be striked?
Yeah, because we wouldn't deal that. We would
Okay.
not be dealing with that. The
Great.
state would be dealing with that.
Okay, perfect. So we'll take that out as well. That's fantastic. And then we all know that cats is a perfect and wonderful and just
And that was
unbelievably clean.
recently redone and approved by the commissioners.
Okay,
And they rewrote a lot of the language that I had been tasked with writing that, because you were tasked with this. And they changed it around quite a bit. And the onus for them not wanting Brandywine Valley SPCA in there was because they wanted to make it the local, in case
Oh, okay.
Brandywine sold to
Okay.
someone else like Delaware SPCA.
okay, so that's,
So
I'll
they,
just take
I
that out.
had put that in there and they changed it back to
Gotcha,
the local.
that makes sense, perfect. Yeah, and that's why I was like, I don't need to change, we don't need to change anything in here. And to go right along, and I'm sure Ray would probably agree and just, have his own response and opinion on this, but just inserting language for the improper feeding of migrating birds, ducks, geese, basically putting in a code that you shouldn't be giving them bread and all kinds of other stuff. So very simple line, can't hurt. And
Right,
then,
and we've put up, or the city has put up signage at all the right-of-ways
yep, and
indicating that same thing.
right, and under prohibition, just adding the separate section C, very simple, no person shall feed, cause, or permit to be fed or provide food for seagulls, seals, or any other mammal or waterfowl from the beach or boardwalk. So please don't
Right.
feed.
There's no such thing as a seagull. They're gulls,
Okay, I'll strike C.
probably 15 varieties.
We're
Okay.
gonna
Species.
change that, Marcia.
That's important.
Yeah,
For a
that's
bird.
why I don't do the bird part. Violations and penalties was clean. I don't know, do we think a fine less than $5, more than $50 for feeding birds and mammals and gulls? What do we think? I mean, is that really something
Is
we
there
need
any
to think about?
signage on those is there any language on that city signage that indicates a
It used-
penalty or
Well,
a
it
fee?
used to say, don't feed the seagulls,
Mm-hmm,
but with no penalty.
mm-hmm.
Okay, so
I don't-
the new signs that were put, well, it's been a couple of years now, by the Turtle Bridge. Is there any language on there about a penalty?
I don't think there's a penalty. I did see the sign the other day, but I really don't think there's a penalty. So maybe we can toss that around. And what will happen next step is we'll get a much cleaner version of this, much cleaner.
But yeah,
You shouldn't be bothering the turtles either.
and as you do that, just make sure you leave all the current language on there as well,
Yep.
and just redline it. Because when we eventually sit with Glenn, he's gonna wanna see everything
Everything
that's
all
there,
together.
yeah.
And then moving on to trapping of dogs, cats, or other animals. Upon first glance, you wouldn't really think this, but I know there are some folks in town that do trap animals. Not with permit. But Animal Control Service, we're updating that definition. Going down to trapping permitted, live traps should be the only method used. Leg traps are prohibited. We tossed that around, I think, at one point, but then came to the conclusion that we should keep that in.
The leg traps are prohibited.
Yes, indeed.
So residents of the city can trap.
Yes.
There's no state provision or rule law.
It has to
On
be a
that.
licensed responsible because of the TNR.
Should be, but there's no state.
It calls
language
for
that it must
volunteers
be.
under TNR that are able to do it under that.
Oh, yeah, I
part of
know
the code.
that.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about trapping squirrels and stuff.
Well, and that's why I put this in here. Because, I think that if you're going to trap, then you have to maintain your trap and not leave an animal in a trap for 3 days. So just putting that language in that includes squirrels, felines, rodents shall be left in a trap for a period of in excess.
So
of
other
4
than
hours.
TNR, what trapping would people do? Why would they trap?
Skunks,
Squirrels.
raccoons.
So if I have a skunk, I can trap him with my live trap and do what with him?
Most folks will just take them somewhere else and dump them.
I'll take him to your house.
Yeah, just take them across town.
Sure feels like it
Let 'em
now.
go. They
Oh.
Won't be back for 6 months.
But yes, you can, and I think that,
So
you know,
so
I have
that
a
is
feeling that's
legal,
why I
you
have
don't
so
have to
many
have a
crabs.
licensed
right.
trapper to do
And
that.
Ray can speak to that. You know, I'm sure he will. He helped me with one that had been trapped and left for quite some time. You know, we couldn't, of course, gauge how long it had been trapped, but, you know, we were both concerned that it had been well past a reasonable amount of time for it to get out, so.
We don't leave ours more than 2 hours.
Mhm. Yeah, which is fine.
Mhm.
We fought this battle before.
I mean, I even think 4 hours at some time is, I mean, that's not incredibly long.
No, but on a very
you might
hot
go-
day, if it was in the sun,
Didn't
it
we
would
fight
be a
this
very
battle
long time.
before? Didn't they, I mean, what was that man's name? There was only a certain number of people that could trap.
No, as long as they're licensed, there are licensed.
I don't
trappers.
remember that we permitted residents, although you could go and get a trap from the city.
Yes.
Well, hopefully nobody will do it.
Yeah. Yeah. But residents of the city can trap.
So is 4 hours common
Dogs.
language in other municipalities or?
I have found, yes, I had found that to be consistent in
Okay.
other
yeah,
language.
Yeah, I think I've asked you
The
that
guy
before.
that used to
but-
work for the city, I can't remember his name, it wasn't Lingo, but it was a name like, began with an L. He used to give you a list of instructions where you, the person that hired him, had to watch the trap and call him regularly.
Mhm.
But I don't know what happened to him.
Mhm. Yes. So I think it's fine where it stands. It's just, you know, putting that time limit on it. So again, you don't have,
Right,
you don't have any issues with it.
well, that's a move forward. then.
In terms of a cruelty perspective. So, you know, this moves on to professional trappers and requirements and other folks that are trapping. Violations and penalties, $100 to $250. I mean, we can look at all the violations and penalties and see if it's worth increasing anything. I don't think these are heavily enforced in terms of the occurrence, but it certainly can hurt. Move on to violations, penalties, and then enforcement, which again, I didn't really touch in terms of collecting. The last addition here on this very, very last page, you know, thought about it, and, you know, having read a similar addition to code because of a certain circumstance, not that I think we have any need, but it basically, to summarize, that any person or employee of the city that's convicted of cruelty or abandonment of any animal is otherwise guilty of failing to comply and shall be prohibited from obtaining or maintaining any business license relative to the control, possession, supervision, or any other activities involving animals. So let's say you've been convicted for cruelty and now you're gonna come into town and trap cats or squirrels or whatever. The city has the ability to say no to that.
Yeah, I don't think we can use the word employee there.
Okay.
Because employees have their own set of rules and regs
Okay.
within city code.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
Okay.
Oh,
and,
good.
and any person, it would include them
Mm-hmm.
already with that language.
This very, very last thing that kind of got cut off because I think I literally ran out of space, would go in a section where we would talk about emergencies and natural disasters. During any and all emergencies, including a natural disaster, act of terrorism, or any event requiring evacuation or displacement, no animals should be left behind within, tethered to any shelter, or left outdoors attended. Citizens shall contact the appropriate agencies for instructions and options for appropriate animal sheltering during evacuation. So nobody in the city limits can leave during a hurricane, whatever, storm, and leave an animal behind. Would you do that? No, but is it a sensible
Well,
inclusion? I don't know.
You know, it's
Is
been.
it overkill? I don't know.
People certainly have done it in the South.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, and you know,
see it on
that's-
the news
we-
all the time.
Seen
Sure,
that a
I
lot.
read an article about it, and that's why I thought it was a good idea to put it in.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think
That's
so
good.
too, Cheryl, and maybe it becomes its own section. I
Section.
don't know that it gets buried anywhere else here. Yeah,
Well, I appreciate everybody looking over this because I know it's quite lengthy, and it can be a little bit mind-boggling, just the way things jump all over the place. So hopefully the next version we read will be much cleaner.
it'll probably be messier
It may be.
because you're making more changes.
Yeah,
No,
I like to
no,
scribble
but,
things.
no. I think it'll become more and more concise and succinct.
And in this folder, do not feel obligated to read any of this. This is language that I pulled from all over the place that, if it were sensible to include, we do. If not, then it's hamster litter box worthy. But again, it's just language that I thought was interesting and worth looking at. Before we move on to anything else, because this does wrap up the city code section, I think, and I don't want to belabor anybody. The city of Suffolk, Virginia did adopt this the tethering ordinance, I think a certain way to say that, which is pretty concise, and it gives a list of
And
what
this
the
is
expectations
Virginia,
are.
As in the United States of America,
Mhm.
Virginia.
Yep, what the requirements are, what, necessary things an animal requires, the leash law, adequate care, what's considered adequate space, adequate water, shelter, vaccinations, just a kind of like a foolproof, like this is, if you don't know how to care for an animal, don't have one, but I thought this was actually pretty concise and an interesting way to put it together. So I thought if there was a way when and if we do incorporate some of these new requirements
Absolutely.
of like no
That's great.
tethering and temperature and also resources, pet-free pantry to mimic this in a similar template to where it can be accessible to anybody at any of the city offices.
That's great.
So
this is
we
well
can
done.
copy that. It's
Oh, I
really
think
well
that-
done,
I
yeah.
can't
Thank you
believe
for
it. It's
sharing
amazing.
Oh, yeah, really well
Absolutely.
done. This is the kind of thing that could go on the website as well.
Absolutely, yep,
And that's part of the educational process.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
sure.
Some
Right.
people don't
So
think.
I
that
like
rounds
that.
that section out, now that everybody's ready for a stiff drink.
Okay, well, thank you, Cheryl.
Sure thing.
Thanks so very much.
That was great, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, moving right along, we are at almost 3:30.
3:30,
No. Yes.
almost cocktail hour.
It's almost 3:30, Libby. And the next item is a quick update from Marcia and Bob on the TNR program here in the city.
Okay, we've had one cat in the city that we've taken care of, and 4 cats just outside of the city where we help someone take care of the 4.
I haven't seen a single cat.
And the one cat that was on State Road was taken in by a property owner as a pet.
Oh, cool,
Wonderful.
Nice.
So it wasn't put back on the street,
that's great.
Mhm.
as pet cats are not to be put back on the street. And she is the one who told us about it. She adopted it. We got it spayed for her, and she adopted it.
That's great.
And there's no way, there's no way to figure out where it came from.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
I mean,
most
I'm sure
likely
that's impossible.
abandoned.
Yeah,
The same with the cats that we're dealing with now just over the bridge. All of a sudden they appeared.
Mhm.
But we've got 4 out of the 5 done, and the 5th is supposed to be done tomorrow.
Very good, very good. Thank you. And thanks for the good work you're both doing in the city. Cheryl, I'm going to turn it back to you for kind of a once-over summary of the Better
yeah, make it really quick.
Pet-Friendly Cities
Yep.
program, and then we can have a
So-
little discussion as to what we want to do with this.
Yep, a few months ago, Dick and I were made aware of this program through Mars. We all are familiar with them as the chocolate folks, but they also they do pet food. So they launched this Better Cities for Pets program. It's an initiative to make cities more pet friendly and embrace the bond between humans and their pets, and really encourage folks to become advocates and activists to have the best possible situation and environment for folks and their pets. So this is a pretty cool program. It's a nice initiative, and I think it's attainable for Rehoboth, considering we meet a lot of these guidelines, and then we also, some are kind of relatively not applicable, but it's, basically having access to shelters, pet-friendly homes, pet-friendly housing policies, pet-friendly businesses, healthy pets and people, ways for the community and for citizens to embrace pet ownership and share the benefits of the human-animal bond. It also encourages responsible pet ownership, which is reflective in some of that code language that we just took in. So in pet-friendly cities, pet owners know how to care for their pets and act responsibly towards other people and other pets. The whole plan, there's a playbook online, and what it does is it takes the circular graph that you're looking at and breaks it down into steps to attain those goals, which, incorporating shelters, working with the community to make sure there are pet-friendly options for housing, areas for potential parks or bettering the existing parks and green space that are available to pets, and also encouraging pet-friendly businesses. So a lot of these we really already touch on. I think it's a really super attainable goal, and obviously the point is to use it as a marketing tool for the city of Rehoboth, and also as a very positive PR initiative as well. Included in here, the human-animal bond. We all know this, all of us sitting here. Just a little bit of the background in terms of why this program is important and so successful. The program basically aims to help cities become more pet-friendly so that everyone can enjoy whether it's living here full-time or visiting with their entire family unit. The last section that kind of brings us to what we're going to talk about is the requirements of hydration stations and pet waste containers and areas. And Dick and I kind of talked about that in the early stages of looking at this playbook in terms of, would we do this, how would we do this, and what would it look like? So I included just a very brief and basic idea of a pet waste container, and I think the discussion would come down to, the cost, the maintenance, and the placement, and that would kind of stretch that item off the list. I'm not sure off the bat if any of these already exist. I had the same conversation, a very similar conversation with folks in Dewey, and they do already have these. Almost every street on the ocean side. And
The way stations.
they do.
And do they have a before and after comment about this?
Not necessarily. I didn't really get one.
When I was president of Henlopen Junction, we had a bad dog poop problem. And when we put the two of the waste, and all we had the bags, and we just had a garbage can next to it, it was reduced by 80% in less than a month.
Make it easy for people. Yeah, it
And
can
we could
help.
try a couple, like at the end of the boardwalk, where they always drop their bags.
Sure. And I think we all know and assume that we're not looking at that issue coming from full-time residents for the most part. We're looking at visitors and kind of trying to offer options so that there are no issues.
This is a pilot program of the first block and the boardwalk.
So we're kind of segueing into the next topic, whereas the pet-friendly city is much broader than
Yeah, it's a lot of different
than
things.
just that. So
It's good.
So the reason to bring this up today is, is it something as a committee we want to pursue? Do we need more information to pursue it? Do we, it's going to take some work because there is it's responding to, it's more than a questionnaire, but
Mhm.
it's,
Yeah.
Well, I think
it's providing a lot
we have
of
to define the
information.
problem first. Do we still have a problem?
Well, it's bigger than just having poop stations,
Yeah.
becoming a pet-friendly.
I think,
It's dealing
It's
with
a designation.
all of these different
I think it's
aspects.
very positive.
And there's, of course, there's signage and like you said, designation that comes
Yeah.
with that.
It's a little like, becoming a Tree USA
Mhm.
city. We get designated every couple of years that way by providing data that indicates that indeed we qualify,
Mhm.
and it's good for the city. It appears that doing this, would be good for the city, good for pet owners, good for the animals.
Mhm.
And I think we already have a bit of a reputation of being a pet-friendly city.
Absolutely.
I think my recommendation would be that we finalize the rewriting of the animal code first and getting that approved by the commissioners, and then take on the second project,
Mhm.
rather than bombard the commissioners
Sure.
with all these things at once.
And that
Yeah,
makes sense
I
because
agree
some
with
of
that.
the requirement for the
Yeah.
Better Cities for Pets includes a little bit of that language of being, more proactive. Yeah, that's a good timeline.
And Cheryl, do I remember correctly, there's not a specific deadline or timeline for applying for this, it's just whenever a municipality is ready to do it. Okay, so we like this idea, but let's continue to put our energy and effort into the code.
I think that makes sense.
Does that make sense, Marcia, to you?
Yes, it's just been turned down before.
But finish what we started first.
Okay, so let me come back then to the pet waste dispensers, because that is separate from this.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, this is the concept of becoming a pet-friendly city is a big program unto itself. That's one aspect of it, but just one aspect. So let me just briefly introduce two other pieces of correspondence for the record that now apply to the pet waste dispensers. One is a letter that came just after our last meeting from Alan Henney. Many of you know Alan. And he wrote and he referenced the city of Hyattsville where he lives in the off-season. And he said, and I'm going to summarize this and not deal with his entire letter. Did you know that about 24% of the bacteria that pollutes our waterways are contributed by dog waste? When diseases from these bacteria find their way into local streams and local waters, the community water isn't just gross, it's actually unsafe. To help fight water pollution, the city of Hyattsville is receiving support from Prince George's County, the Chesapeake Bay Trust, and the Environmental Finance Center at the University of Maryland. But we can't do it without your help. 10 new doggy bag stations have now been installed across town, and then he goes on to give a little more detail on that. And he shared that with me as an example of what another community has done recently and why they have done that. And then Cheryl and I talked and thought, well, let's put it on the agenda. It's been on before, Marcia, as you indicated, but it probably hasn't been talked about for a few years formally. And Mayor Paul Kuhn saw it on our agenda, and so he wrote me a very brief note and said, I was looking at the agenda and I noticed the discussion of pet waste dispensers. I've always thought that'd be a good idea for the entrances to the beach. However, I would suggest this be for off-season only. Dewey has these at the entrances to the beach. However, their rules are a bit more relaxed at the beach. I would think that the city may be able to fund some of this, if not all of it. I also think it would be appropriate in our city parks. Thanks, Paul. So,
What's that from?
Paul
Oh,
Kuntz, our mayor. So, he is supportive, and that's something we can talk more about, or we can begin to take some action on it.
I think first we've got to take a look at, is there a problem? I don't
Is
have
there
any
a
problem doing it just to be nice.
Well, didn't we
Is
get
there a problem?
a note, we got a note before about somebody that was swimming or somebody that was on the beach and had a consistent
Yes,
complaint,
yes.
I
yes,
think.
there
I mean, that
a
was only
letter.
one, so I
Mhm.
don't know, does that make it a problem? I don't know.
We see it all the time.
Well,
Mhm.
I think that is a problem.
Well, I walk the canal because I live on the canal with my dog, and I see it there all the time. There are signs up from the city that went up years ago that indicate that by city code, you're to pick up the waste, but there still is a lot left
Okay, so
there. And there is a hotel there that's pet friendly, and I think that's where a lot of it comes from.
So there's a problem, if nothing else, right there. So one station to see how that changed would give us some guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're right, people who don't live here aren't going to be quite as religious about it as.
The only thing to take into account, because I think we had talked about it, and it obviously came up in conversation with the town of Dewey Beach,
How about a camera?
was who maintains them? You know, who's changing them out, and are they on a specific schedule for the trash folks to empty them, the waste services folks to empty them? Because there's obviously, that's gonna give them an added responsibility.
Oh, yes, and they have their hands full.
Mm-hmm.
But I was thinking of letting Dick do this.
Oh, it just goes under the list of everything else, right?
Community
Perhaps the
service.
commissioner should just take turns, we could take weeks, huh?
You've got enough time on your hands, right?
There are some dispensers around, and I'm trying to think where,
Breakers Hotel has one.
yes, that's where I've seen one, and they seem to maintain that by keeping the bags in it
Empty the trash.
and emptying the trash, yes.
Has anyone spoken to Rick Kirchhoff about the problem?
I have mentioned it. I think he even has, if I remember correctly, I think he even said he maybe had a signage or something in his lobby or with a contract that people sign as. No, probably 80% of the people, it works just fine for. But I see it in other parts of the city too.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I like the people pick it off the boardwalk and drop it at the end of the boardwalk for somebody to pick up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there are some that will pick it up, but then they just drop the bag down,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of defeats the purpose.
And then there are the people that put it in the yard waste containers.
Mm-hmm.
That's
And the
no
owner
more
has to
fun.
go in, take it out.
Yep.
Well, and I think, yeah, like Dick said, that's something we can, I don't think it's a huge undertaking to move forward on the side with, even if there's one that's a pilot
Mm-hmm.
to try.
Maybe identify a couple key areas where we have a problem, i.e. along the canal dip where you are, and try it. Maybe just take 2 or 3 different locations and put it up. We already obviously have the support of the mayor, we just need to get the commissioners to agree to it, and then a pilot program could begin.
And the cost of these, one station with signage, bags, and a container is about $125, $130
Mm-hmm.
for each one, which I can't see as crazy expensive.
I know where I walk my dogs around Lake Gerard, there's several trash cans there already. Seldom do I ever see someone has left their dog waste along the trail or whatever. So it's in my area, it's really good. Right? Everyone's kind of paying, and there's enough trash cans, you use your own bag and you put them in.
Well, when the school was open, nobody picked it up.
Yeah.
Well, I think Dewey gets businesses to pay for the bags because they get to advertise on the
Like
bags.
the naming rights of the things, yeah.
Went through this before in 2005. I can't find the price of the dispenser.
What did you just say, Cheryl? 100 and?
Yeah, there's a price here on these.
Yeah, so, the price is reasonable, very reasonable, it seems like.
And I think it does make sense to not do 8 at once.
Right.
You know, you try one as a pilot and
Right.
see how it works.
Well, is it something we want to think about and kind of look around the city at before our next meeting?
Why don't we identify
And see if
a
we
few
can get some
locations
feedback.
that we feel like we could try it, and then maybe put a proposal together that, Dick, you could
Sure.
present to the commissioners.
Sure. Sounds good.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything over at the Stokely Street Park, Grove Park, Lake Avenue. I think we
Marcia,
kind of
you walk the
lost some
whole
things.
town with your dog. I mean, you could probably really identify. I'm limited where I walk mine, and I don't see a problem in mine.
Well, I do all residential till Silver Lake,
Mhm.
and a lot of that is private property. So you really can't put anything down in that area. It's Cranberry Park, which is Lake Gerard, and then the other side where the tot lot is.
Mhm.
Yeah, I never see it at the tot lot.
You know, and even just those medians along Scarborough where everyone's walking or waiting for rentals, I think that's probably a really good spot.
And walking down the median,
Mm-hmm.
it's a great place.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's all take
think-
that on as our homework assignment for the next meeting.
And see what your
Really look.
neighbors think.
Yeah. Look around the city, look at what there is, see where there might be a problem, and then we'll come back to that.
And if there's a problem, we get a camera.
Okay.
No.
As we think ahead to future agenda, a couple of things. We want to identify a date for our next meeting. Are there other items that any of you have thought of that should be on our next agenda? We have enough?
I think we have enough.
I would agree. When do we want to meet next?
September.
That's a ways away, Libby.
You asked.
I did. Honest answer. All right, so it's about May 1st. Part of this falls on Cheryl, if she's willing to continue to play with the code and take our discussion.
Yeah, I'm open
And,
to everyone's input, suggestions, all of that as we proceed, even if it's not in a formal meeting. You know, if there are things that kind of came to mind or fall back on that, you know, certainly make that known. I don't think that we necessarily need to schedule a meeting for the whole entire group to go over that same stuff, because it's kind of a work in progress, and we'll level it out a little bit more. But I think,
How much time do you need, however, was really my question. We want to have a next meeting before you have time to do anything. So it's, in other words, it's being fair to you and your schedule.
with it being May 1st, I mean, does it make sense to do something in late June, or is that too busy for everybody? Do we think that that's fine?
I think that can work. Bob, can that work for you?
May, June?
Has Tuesday continued to be a good day at 2 o'clock? Okay. So late June would be the 18th or the 25th?
25th of what?
June.
June, that's so soon.
We're talking late June. All right,
Time
are we together
flies.
on this? Late June.
Time flies.
18th or 25th are the two last Tuesdays of June of this year, Libby.
Does anybody have a preference in terms of whether it's the last week of the month or? I mean, I'll go ahead and throw out the 18th if that's a possibility.
18th work for everyone? Okay, I will need to confirm that with Ann. Do that.
Wake up.
Okay. I will confirm that with Ann and then with all of you,
The
and
16th is Father's Day.
yes.
Okay. Doesn't concern me.
We're talking Tuesday, 2 days later.
All right.
Okay. And we have no citizens present, so we have no comment from them. Anything else from any of you? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor? We are adjourning at 3:46 PM. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And the system is still on until we get Ann up here to turn it off. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for
Yes.
sitting through that. I know it's kind
Thanks for
of
putting it together.
mind-numbing. Sure. I don't know why it's exciting to me to look at a lot of words and make them all fit together.
We
Oh,
are,
no.
we have been on, we continue to be on until
I'll tell you, I love this.
Ann
shit.
turns it off.
I don't go to any more meetings, I just sit at home.
Is it this one in the middle, or it's right there, right? Hi, Mom.
Yeah. Thanks, Ann.
Thanks,
Very
Dan.
good time. I was just gonna call you.
She was watching us on
Bye,
television.
Mom.